The chair recognizes Keith Ellison, former state legislator and a trial attorney for over 13 years.
Mr. Fein, could you do a signing statement, or based on the precedent of this White House, could you do a signing statement that says that for a law that said there's no money to carry out a law in which you've done a signing statement?
That certainly would be a new high water mark of audacity, but that doesn't mean it might not be reached.
Right.
He could try to veto it and say he won't execute that. The problem, however, is that it's a crime to expend money that hasn't been properly authorized and appropriated by the Congress of the United States. So if he tried to do that, he'd really be risking
risking what?
Impeachment.
Okay.
Because I think, for whatever reason, there seems to be still a consensus that the power of the purse is inviolate and the president can't spend money that this House has not appropriated.
But based on the signing statements we've seen, it wouldn't shock anybody to see one in a case as you've described. Yeah. Congressman Kucinich, what is the factual basis for your claim that the president made knowing untrue statements, for the White House made knowing untrue statements to the Congress, which led us into war?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and Mr. Ellison, I took Senate Joint Resolution 45, which came from the White House. I took H.J. Res. 114, which we passed, which was essentially the same. I examined it line by line, and in doing so, was able to come to an easy conclusion that the representations that were made in both of these resolutions, substantive representations,
could you sort of
were in fact summarize? Not backed up by fact.
Could you summarize?
Excuse me?
I was going to ask the congressman to summarize the representation, just so for people looking who don't
for
know the
example, in both, and when I speak to this, I'll speak to both S.J. Res. 45 and House Joint Resolution 114, and this is what we acted upon. We were told that Iraq was continuing to threaten the national security interests of the United States. That's a direct quote from these resolutions. It not only turned out not to be true, but there was intelligence that existed at the time that suggested that the White House knew then that it wasn't true. That we were told in this resolution that Iraq was continuing to possess and develop a significant chemical and biological weapons capability. We learned since then that was not true, and there's evidence that suggests that the White House understood at that time that it was not true and nevertheless represented to the Congress that it was. So we were told that Iraq was actively seeking a nuclear weapons capability, that Iraq had a willingness to attack the United States, that Iraq had demonstrated capability and willingness to use weapons of mass destruction, that Iraq could launch a surprise attack against the United States or its armed forces, that there was an extreme magnitude of harm that would result in the United States, that would result in the United States and its citizens from such an attack, that there was justification for the use of force by the United States to defend itself, that Iraq had, there was an attempt to connect Iraq with 9/11 and with al-Qaeda's role in 9/11, and over saying Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. This came from the resolutions which Congress was presented and which, based on information and belief, members of Congress acted upon and gave the President the authorization to use force. So what I've done is to very narrowly present a case here that's narrowly tailored to exactly what it is we were told. I don't even, Mr. Chairman, I don't even get into the discussion of what the Senate Intelligence Committee got into in terms of the statements that were made about biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. I say you don't even have to go that far. And so what I would humbly recommend that the committee do is to start with the post-war analysis that has incontrovertible proof that all of these assertions that were made in here were not fact-based. Then you look at the pre-war intelligence, and you can see that, that the intelligence that was said to have been acted upon was selective, and there's questions raised about the role of the Office of Special Plans in helping to produce it, even though it contradicted time-honored intelligence that was available from established federal agencies in both the CIA and the State Department. Then you look at which intelligence was right but not used or acted upon, which intelligence was wrong and acted upon, and then go into who was it who helped shape the wrong intelligence and caused it to be acted upon. And that then, I think, will lead to a chain of events that inalterably, inevitably, must lead to people in very high positions in his government.
Professor Presser, based on the presentation that Congressman Kucinich just made, wouldn't you agree that there is at least a basis for a inquiry that could lead to impeachment, just based on those facts, if proved?
If proved, I would think so, but we've heard some suggestions that that view of the facts is incorrect.
Right, but wouldn't you agree that it would be the Senate's obligation to weigh the facts, not, is that right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
I think you mean the House in this case.
Well, I would say ultimately the Senate would be the one that would decide whether or not a case had been proved or not, but it would be the House to see whether these facts, it could rise to the level to form an accusation.
Yeah, you have to decide whether they're accurate or not.
Right, but if proved, if Congressman Kucinich offerings were proved, wouldn't you agree that would form the basis of an inquiry that could lead to impeachment?
I think they could form the basis of an inquiry, sure.
And Mr. Rabkin, wouldn't you also agree that if proved, now of course you may not agree with the facts as Mr. Kucinich offered them, but wouldn't you agree that if proved that would form the basis of an inquiry for impeachment?
I'm not sure what exactly we're talking about now. If Mr. Kucinich's, I mean, what I understood Mr. Kucinich to be saying, Congressman Kucinich to be saying, was he thinks what the administration presented to Congress has not been borne out by what we have learned since. And that does not seem to me impeachable. If what he was saying is they knowingly and deliberately deceived Congress, that would be in a different category. If that's what we're talking about, that they knowingly and deliberately deceived them, yeah, that could be the basis of an inquiry.
Okay, now, Professor Congressman Kucinich, am I correct?
If I may.
Could you clarify for
if I may, it is the proper role of the Judiciary Committee, given that Congress received a resolution that made representations that all turned out to be categorically, that most of which turned out to be categorically false. It would then seem to me that it would be appropriate to make an inquiry so you can get the truth. Then if the truth backs up that the administration made misrepresentations, then it would be up to the committee to decide whether to forward that in the form of a report to the full House, and whether the House then, as individual members, would act upon it. The only reason I'm here, and the only reason that I have been pushing for a moment like this, where we're in a 6-hour hearing now, where members of the Judiciary Committee could have things laid out in front of them, is to get to the truth. Let's find out what the truth is. Was Congress presented with a case for war that was not based on the truth? And if it was, and if that happened, then there has to be consequences.
The gentleman's time has expired.